This is the state of the world. Catalytic conversations with leaders who are reinventing the web and building trusted technologies for the future of humanity. Brought to you by EXO, the Internet of Impact.
So I'm super thrilled to have Srikanth on today's call. And Sri, you and I are working together on a project in India, and so we get to chat a lot, but we don't often have 15 minutes of focused conversation where we stop and take stock and just really sort of think about like what the current state of the world is and think about what we're doing about it and how that could potentially bring about some big changes. And so before we kick off that conversation, would you like to just introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, sure, Sean. So first of all, thanks for having me here. How you mentioned, we've been talking for quite some time, and it's nice to have a forum where we can discuss things like this. So I am Srikanth Talapadi, and I am the founder of Chimple. We are an EdTech nonprofit based out of India. And our focus is primarily literacy and numeracy for children and adults as well in our own vernacular language and mother tongue.
Wonderful. So we'll dive a bit more into that. But let's start off by asking the question, what is it that's got your attention at the moment? What is it that's happening in the state of the world that you're observing that perhaps is an indication of a tipping point of something that's changing or something that you're concerned about?
Yeah. So I mean, the most crucial problem that I think about a lot is enabling equity in education. So what I feel is that with the rise of internet and devices and all these technologies, there's actually sort of a divide between the haves and the have-nots. Whereas the haves have, people have multiple devices, multiple access to learning opportunities, whereas the have-nots have very limited opportunities. And even if they probably have devices or if they have some avenue for accessing this, it is, relative to their income, it's really highly priced. And this creates a sharp divide between the two, which I feel, as time progresses, it might keep expanding. So a lot of what I do primarily, I keep thinking, how can we enable equity? What are the different things that we need to do to reduce this inequity? And when I think about it, primarily, it falls into three things. One is the device itself. By device, I mean, computers or tablets or mobile phones through which learners, children, adults, whoever it may be, can access the learning content. The second is the bandwidth itself. Bandwidth is getting cheap world over, but again, it's compared to a person's income and the different choices that a person has to spend that bandwidth on, which is primarily entertainment and communication, right? So education kind of comes far down the line. And the third thing is actually good open source software for learning. In English, essentially there are, like tons of choices, but once you come into vernacular languages, in India or, world over, in Africa, South America, the number of software that children and adults can access to learn are very few and the high quality ones. So my sort of focus has always been, how can we reduce this inequity as we go along? A lot of my current thinking, has been, actually inspired by the whole Alphabond project that you and I have been working on, is to how to use decentralized finance, decent token economics, and community currencies to actually improve access to all these three, and most importantly, increase access to financing for delivering any of these programs.
Yeah, that's a fantastic synopsis. And so I think we're really quite at the cutting edge here of the intersection between educational technologies and then the financing and coordination and state change technologies that we have with blockchain. So from your perspective, as someone who's primarily been developing educational technologies, what do you see as being potentially a catalyst and something that you're excited about and that you see the potential for perhaps having quite massive change in how things are on the ground and the addressing the problems that you've discussed?
Yeah, so I think building incentive systems for lifelong learning. So that's, I think, something that is really poised to take off. By incentive systems for lifelong learning, what I mean is, first, what could be the incentive for corporate social responsibility funds, for local shopkeepers or local finance companies, governments, and other institutions, right? What could be the incentives for them to actually come in and improve the the educational access in villages and in communities where these are rarely seen right now. The incentives could also mean what could be the incentive for a learner to actually continue the learning journey, right? For in a lot of families, especially in rural communities, school is seen as a chore. So something that you just tick the boxes. My children have to study till high school because that's something the government mandates. But given any opportunity, I would like to shift my kid into some sort of a income generating job or something like that, right? So how can we incentivize children and adults as well to continue the learning journey and view that not just as a chore but something that would improve their lives as time goes on. Until now, I had actually been thinking primarily about children, how to incentivize them to learn. But more and more, I am also looking at how to incentivize adults, because the world is changing at such a rapid stage. What people know and have learned till now may not be enough for them to be competitive as time goes along. But spending the time to actually learn something is expensive. So how can we incentivize adults also to continue learning and making them competitive in this current challenging economic situation? And also taking all this data, right? So when we look at the whole lifelong learning, we have these data points, from children, from adults, everybody who's been learning. Now, how do we actually store this? Not with one educational company, right? But across different educational companies, right? How do we store this in a decentralized manner, anonymous manner? How do we actually give credentials to all these people, right? So how do we give a certificate to each of them saying, you have completed this and this is the skills that you have obtained? It's how do you tie all of these together in a decentralized way that will actually make it worthwhile for an adult or a child also to continue their learning journey. So this is some things, in terms of incentives, primarily community currency based incentives, which I feel, is if we pay a little bit more attention to it, I feel it's going to take off very quickly, because people will see the benefit of this very quickly, in either in their own children or in their own economic opportunities. And I feel that, this is something that is really poised to take off.
So I think for a lot of people, it's kind of foreign to imagine what this looks like on the ground. could you maybe just give us a little description of the pilot that you're currently running, that we're running together, and what does it mean for families, and what's actually happening? How are these technologies being implemented, and what do you see the potential for how we take this current implementation and add incentives and add the other parts of the technology capabilities that you've mentioned?
Yeah. So the Alphabond project, which you and we've been working on with a major financial services company. So essentially, it tries to reinvent the way the whole incentivization of education happens. So right now, whenever any organization wants to invest in education, it's very opaque, right? And the returns are probably not guaranteed, or at least something that you cannot gauge for the next 1 year or so, or maybe even beyond 1 year. So what the Alphabond project does is, one, gives a platform for investors to come in and invest into these impact development bonds. So now these bonds, typically, the way that they have been done before is like a 1 year or 3 year bond, which locks the investor in for that brief period of time. So there is no sort of way to exchange it, or there is no way to trade it, which sort of limits the attractiveness of these bonds. Now with the Alphabond project, what we have done is actually have IoT devices, and these IoT devices are actually tablets, which are in two places. One place, and this is also something that we have done to counter the whole COVID scenario, where children could not go to schools, especially in India for the last 1.5 years. Children and children have not been able to go to school, so they can take these tablets loaded with Chimple educational software to their homes. And every time they actually learn something, they pass a threshold, this data gets encrypted, and registered using the IXO client, and then it gets sent to the IXO World server. Now these sort of claims gets collected over a period of 1 month, at which a calculation is run through an oracle on the IXO server, and all these values of the children's learning levels gets converted into something called an alpha value. And the alpha value is very, very similar to how a financial bond dealer would actually look at a risk of a bond. So now this alpha value is created, and then every month it gets updated. And in the future, it could be updated on a daily basis as well. And then these would actually encapsulate the risk that's actually involved in the program, which would enable a new investor to come in and maybe take over from the current investor, or maybe come up with more financing to expand the current program itself. So these are sort of the technologies that we've been using, and the way we kept it on the ground is very flexible to counter the COVID school closures. One is, children can use it at home, or when the schools reopen, the teachers can actually facilitate usage of this in the schools as well.
That's fantastic. And yeah, so we've just kicked this off in recent weeks. We've got a 1-year pilot to collect the data to prove this out and hone the system. And then I guess the big vision is to really make this amplified so that it can be distributed in a decentralized way to many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of households and children, as well as adults, for the lifelong learning. So it's a great vision. In the last couple of seconds, we're just coming to the end of this call. What would you say is the take-home message for people who are listening to this conversation that could make them think differently, or maybe do something differently, or have a change in mindset about how these technologies can have a catalytic change on the state of things?
Yeah, so the one thing that I would like to tell the community is, until now, decentralized finance and blockchain technologies have been used primarily for finance, but the financial economy. But what I would like to have everyone think about is how can it serve the educational economy, right? So even if we look at education, it is an economy of its own, right? And it can improve its efficacy, it can improve its sort of equity and sort of penetration into the market when we bring in any of these decentralized solutions, because nobody learns at one stage in life or at one place, right? People keep shifting from places to places, and they keep shifting from different sorts of education. So how decentralized finance has kind of grown, and it's made a huge impact. I would say decentralized education is something that everybody should give a thought to, and how can we sort of come in and tokenize this. So I would like to have the listeners think about that and maybe come up with newer schemes in the educational economy.
Thank you so much, Srikanth. Look forward to continuing the work together and to the future conversations that we'll have.
Thanks very much, Sean. Thanks for having me here. And it was a really wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic.